Good morning. And it's always good to have a few minutes together as we talk about God's Word, talk about our country a little bit. And there's a weekend approaching. Of course, last night soul winning, tomorrow morning soul winning. We believe in soul winning. It's the Great Commission was not go on your website or have your YouTube channel or have a welcome sign outside your church. The Great Commission, go into all the world and preach the gospel. And I hope all of you that go to our church are carrying gospel tracts, pass them out wherever you are. There are many times in the course of a week I get to talk to somebody just accidentally. I'm not intentionally looking for anybody. They're there. And I was in the car wash one day, and a highway patrolman came by with his car to get washed. And I thought, well, I ought to pay for his car wash, but I'll bet he gets it paid for free. So I asked him, and I told him my intent. He said, no, we've got whatever it was they had set up. It didn't cost him. And we got talking. I was able to witness to him, give him a gospel tract, tell him about Christ and why I did what I did, and thank him for what he did. And boy, witness, we ought to do this. So last night, soul winning. Tomorrow, soul winning. And Sunday, the gospel we preached. We've already got an adult couple that have been saved, that are getting baptized Sunday morning. And if all goes well, you know how the devil throws wrenches and things. That's the plan. But I'm so thankful to be a part of a church, a working church, a faithful church. And I'm thankful for each of you that are a part of it. And whatever church you're in, I hope you'll work. Get some tracts from your church and carry them with you. Maybe no one else goes soul winning. Ask the pastor, could we get some tracts? And if your church doesn't have tracts and doesn't want to get tracts, then I'm just thinking you might want to get a new church. But that's between you and the Lord. But I'm going to read something. I'll be in Psalms 35 in a minute. But I got a book. I like reading. I like books. And I rarely read through a book. It's like this book I'm going to mention here. I use as a reference. I find things in it, but to read cover to cover is very, very rare. Some books I do, but this is a more recent book called In Their Own Words, and it's a 2-volume book. It's a big book, and this is just the actual words of our founders and people in American history. And of course, in history, you can mess it up pretty easy. If you want to find every off thing that someone said or did, you could paint a pretty warped picture of even America. Now, you'd have to work hard at it, but it's possible, obviously. Whoever's gathering the historical notes, they can warp things, and that's understandable. But here's some things. It's titled In Their Own Words, and this is the New England Colonies, Volume 1. And I'm just going to read a note here. This is a pretty famous principle. This is in a letter from John Adams to Mercy Otis Warren, April 16th, 1776. And so this is just a few months before the actual signing of the Declaration. But he says, the form of government which you admire, when its principles are pure, is admirable indeed. It is productive of everything which is great and excellent among men. But its principles are as easily destroyed as human nature is corrupted. Such a government is only to be supported by pure religion or austere morals. Public virtue cannot exist in a nation without private, and public virtue is the only foundation of republics. And I love that statement. Samuel Adams, more of a preacher than John Adams. Both of them were well-versed in scriptural principles. John Adams more the politician, Samuel Adams more the preacher, both very much involved. But public virtue cannot exist in a nation without private, and public virtue is the only foundation of a republic. To understand, here's another one. Statesmen, my dear sir, may plan and speculate for liberty, but it is religion and morality alone which can establish the principles on which freedom can securely stand. The only foundation for a free constitution is pure virtue. And if this cannot be inspired into our people in a greater measure than they have it now, they may change their rulers and the forms of government, but they will not obtain lasting liberty. They will only exchange tyrant for tyranny. And in both these cases, the pressure of Adams was on the individual. And there we have the need for church, the need for teaching and preaching of morals and decency, character, righteousness. And I don't just mean going to church. There's a lot of horrible people go to church. We understand that. We're talking about someone who carries virtue throughout their week, Monday through Sunday, and 7 days a week. It's the person who lives a virtuous and moral life at work. It's the person who deals properly with their school and their school teachers, their children's schools. It's the handling of husband and wife relationships and freedom, and a truly free republic. It has to be based on individual morality. You can't create public morality and a nation of public decency without it being in the individual's hearts. And according to Adams, where we read there in the second quote, he says we need a lot more than our country's got right now. And I would say that if we hope to be a free people, we need a lot more morality and decency than our country has right now. And it needs to start with churches. Over in Peter, 1 Peter 4, I believe, verse 17, somewhere in there, he says, the time has come when judgment must begin at the house of God. And if it begin first at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not God? And so the pressure is on the people of God, then the pressure is on the house of God, and then it ripples out to the nation. But the people of God must step up, and they ought to practice this thing of decency and righteousness, and it ought to be in our homes as well as in our jobs, in our churches, in our personal relationships, and that is certainly the hope of America. But I think books like this that are giving us a look into the heart and mind and the philosophies of our founders, I think these are valuable in a day when you can't find anything new being written about our founders and framers that's not slanderous and just horrible as far as picking up anything that they can find that's bad. Well, there's nobody any better. And these people gave the world a chance at freedom. And if we want to exchange our freedom for tyranny, we just need to keep going on this path of moral depravity, and we will most certainly be ruled by tyrants. And we're very close right now to having that happen in America, when the will of the people is being overthrown, and when the IRS is armed and going with full battle gear into places of business. We need to understand tyranny is very close, and only the touch of God will protect us. And so we need God. That's a summary. And so we read over here in Psalm 35. I'll just read a verse or two. And of course, we understand them. The subject here is our feelings and our dealings with others. And in this matter of righteousness, now we all understand, Jesus talked about love your enemies, and he talked about forgiving your enemies. And remember, if you would, in Acts chapter 7, we find Stephen being killed, and he said, Lord, lay not this sin to their charge. And he was very, very concerned. Matthew 5:44, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you. And so we see that there is a lot of instruction about the proper love of others. Now, for me to love my wife, for me to love my neighbor who treats me well, that's not hard. Even the publicans, Jesus would say, even the worst people love those who treat them well. But do you love those who don't treat you well? Remember the question Jesus was asked when he talked about loving your neighbor, and the lawyer, of course, lawyers they've always got a way of twisting and corrupting things, and to fit their agenda. And this lawyer shows up and says, so who's my neighbor? And Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan. And here's a man, a Jewish man, who's robbed and wounded and lay dying in the ditch. And the priest goes by, that religion didn't help. And a Levite goes by, the guy with all the rigid laws, he didn't help. But along came a Samaritan. Now the Samaritans were from the northern half of old Israel. There was Judah and Israel after the nations were split. The northern half were basically half-breeds. They were refused by the Jews. They wouldn't talk to them, hang around them, do business with them. And they were very, very reserved, removed from the Samaritan. Well, the Samaritan came by and saw this guy, picked him up, put him on his own beast, took him to an inn, took care of him. And then when he had to leave to go on his way, he left money at the innkeeper and said, you take care of him when I come back. If you spend more than I give you here, I'll pay you more. But let's take care of this man. And Jesus said, who's your neighbor? Well, the neighbor is the Samaritan. These people were not friends, but he still took care of him because he was a human being and he deserved life and love and a chance. And so your love is not measured by your love for your friends. Your love is measured by your love for those who are not your friends. There is where you're going to find true love exhibited. And so we see this over in Psalm chapter 35 and down at verse 13, 12, 13. It says in Psalm 35, 11, false witnesses did rise up and they laid to my charge things that I knew not. And all this, one of the more difficult things to face is a false accusation. Now in America, it's very common in the political world and all the way down the chain to the common man. You get accused, you're guilty. And I am not going to believe an accusation. It's un-American, it's unlawful, it's unscriptural. And unless that accusation comes with multiple witnesses, you're not supposed to believe it. And I know I get in political and all kinds of trouble for saying things like that. But we've got to understand that our founders put innocent until proven guilty, and because it's right, it's from the scriptures. And this world doesn't like that kind of thing. And there are circumstances, obviously, that some things may vary, and I understand that. But we better be very guarded who we condemn and who we seek to destroy. And when we use our words to try and destroy somebody, that is corrupt beyond words. And especially when you know they were innocent and when you know you're twisting the information. And so you're taking a partial truth and twisting it to try and hurt somebody. Look, people like that are going to face God. Jesus said that they'll give an account for every idle word. Don't think people will get away with it. But what is our response to be? In verse 11, for these false witnesses laid to my charge things that I knew not. Verse 12, they rewarded me evil for good to the spoiling of my soul. The spoil, remember, it was financial. The Proverbs 31 woman, her husband shall have no need of spoil. He won't need to bring home a whole bunch of money. His wife's content. She'll work. She and he will work together to care for the family. And so they spoiled David. They took of his economic things that he has. And then he goes to verse 13. But as for me, now he turns the table. As for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled my soul with fasting, and my prayer returned unto my own bosom. I behaved myself as though he had been my friend or brother. I bowed down heavily as one that mourneth for his mother. But in my adversity, they rejoiced. And he goes on and on about that subject matter there in Psalm 35. And understand how you respond to people who falsely accuse you. Now we're finding out what love is. Now we're finding out what Christ-likeness is, because Jesus was falsely accused over and over and over. So was David, a type of Christ. And they slandered Jesus and lied about Jesus. And but what did Jesus do? He died for them, and he loved them, and he blessed them. And of course, the religious leaders, he was pretty hard on them. But when we consider the things about forgiveness and love, I want to encourage you to keep in mind that this life is short, and we will, just in a little while, we'll leave this world, and all the money will be left behind, all the houses and cars and clothes and phones and computers and all of the cruise ships, and it's all going to be gone. And you'll be in the presence of Almighty God if you're saved. Now, if you're not saved, you're going to go straight to hell. But if you're saved, if you've trusted Jesus Christ as your Savior, you'll be in heaven in the presence of God. But don't think God doesn't notice how we act, how we behave. Don't think God doesn't notice how we've treated people. Now, being good doesn't get you to heaven. Jesus gets you to heaven. But once we get there, our payday, our rewards, what do we have for eternity? Those things, those are the things that we bring with us. And so it's so to me, it's so very vital that we decide to give our lives over to loving people. Now, what is a missionary? A missionary is somebody who goes somewhere where they're not invited to bring a message the people were not asking for. And they're doing it in most cases to pull that person from their religious past. And in many cases to tell them what you believed all your life is a lie. And I'm bringing you the truth. That's uncomfortable. In most cases, the missionary leaves to go. They're leaving comfort and security and family and friends and sanitation. And they're going to a place without sanitation, without family and friends and comfort and ease. And they're going to a place where they'll raise their children in a less than amiable environment, and often in a very difficult situation, often in a dangerous situation. Our missionaries down in Thailand have twice had cobras in their yard, and that's not really what goes on around Southern California. We'll have rattlesnakes if you go outside, very rarely in a housing area, but you hardly ever hear of a rattlesnake bite. But what does a missionary do? A missionary goes and he goes to care. Now, you go back 100 years, the average missionary's time on the mission field would only be 5 to 7 years because they die. Many times en route to the mission field, someone would die. It would take months. It might take 6 months to get from America to where they're going in India or wherever to preach the gospel. Going halfway around the world, they'd be on a ship for 6 months, maybe longer, less. One of our missionaries that was in Japan right after World War II, he said, I forget how long it took him. I started to say, but I can't remember for sure. But it was a long journey on a steamboat of some kind right after World War II. And they went to Japan and spent the next 20 years there preaching the gospel to our enemies, to people who sought to destroy our soldiers in the Pacific. And yet our folks went to Japan because love your enemies. This family went to Japan, children born there, raised their kids there. Why? Because we're to bless those who persecute you, and we're to bless those who curse you. That's Bible Christianity. And we are in such a get-even world. We're in a world of vendettas and let's destroy this person. You don't destroy people. These are the people of God. These are human beings, and even if they're not saved, they're made in the image of God, and they're placed on this earth for a purpose, and we ought to try to get them saved, not try to destroy them. And our nation is so quick to lie and to cheat and to distort. And if they distort the truth, they don't feel like they're lying. We just turned it a little bit. Oh no, you're a liar. If you give an impression that is not true to the reality, that's a lie. And the people of God, we ought to love people. And we ought to seek to be honest and true. And we ought to seek to be faithful. And we ought to seek to love people, even those who don't love us. And I've had a good life, and I know some of you have had a harder life. I've not gone through what a lot of people have gone through. I've always been loved. I've never known a time when my family didn't love me, my parents didn't love me. So I know I have some security and some assurance that perhaps others don't have. But the fact is, he called us to love the world. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. And it's going to start with that guy at work who's a jerk. And we need to decide that. You know that person at church who's not socially appropriate, that person who doesn't know when to be quiet, or that person who can walk right up and interrupt your conversation. They don't have any social graces. How's your love toward them? The Spirit of God over in the book of Galatians says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, gentleness, long-suffering. How's our love? How's our love for people, for that weird person, that person who might not know socially appropriate behavior? How is our love for that person who's harmed us? No, look, Christianity is a thing that exhibits love toward those who don't love them. That's when Christianity becomes very real. And that's when Christianity begins to reflect Christ, who on the cross said, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. David, he said a little later on in Psalm 35, he said, when they were sick, I fasted and prayed for them like it was my mother. Oh, the heart of God loves people. And that's what God's called you and me to do. He said, go into all the way. He said, as Jesus said, as the Father sent me, so send I you. And Jesus was sent to love and to save an old broken world. And that's what you and I have been called to do. I hope we'll go this weekend into today and into tomorrow and Sunday with a heart of love, and that we might invest in others. God's so good. Let's be faithful. Let's try to represent him well. We're his representatives. Like the guy said, we're the only hands he's got. My lips are the only lips that the Lord has in this earth. And oh, may we use them for his glory. May we use them to express the love of God, the mercy of God, the forgiveness of God. Let's represent him well. Hope you have a great day and hope you have a good week. I hope you're in church. Love to see you at our church, 9 o'clock Sunday school, 10:30 church. And I don't know how we ended up getting started early like that, but somehow we got back early in the morning. And it's good you have the rest of the day, but you have to get up awful early with all those little babies to get to church. I hope you'll join us Sunday in church. This next week's Vacation Bible School, if you'd pray about that. And also, if you would, we could use your help with our country store, bring in some gifts and things. We have a great store at the end of Vacation Bible School where the kids can buy. They get funny money for coming to Vacation Bible School, memorizing verses. And then at the little store at the end, they can buy some things. They can buy food. They can buy toys, all free. Gifts are donated. And then we get to give them back to the children. And it's a great time. I hope you'll pray that God will give us a great week.